The bells of the fortress echoed against the stone walls as Jonathan Hale's breath trembled in the cold night air. The reluctant hero gripped the dagger, his hand shaking though he tried to steady it. He had been ordered to silence a bound prisoner, yet his stomach turned with dread. Colonel Marcus Blackwood stood in the shadows, his voice cutting through the silence. Marcus said, "Duty does not wait for your hesitation." Jonathan's eyes darted to the young captive kneeling before him, a messenger caught between empires, whispering prayers to the fading stars. Fear pressed down like the weight of history itself. Jonathan said, "If I kill him, I sever what remains of my honor." Marcus's jaw tightened, his tone sharpened. Marcus said, "Honor is a story the dead cannot tell." Lightning split the sky, thunder rolling through the valley, and Jonathan felt his breath hitch. His choice tonight would either bind him to the code of an assassin or betray everything that once made him human. The storm's fury deepened as Jonathan stepped back, heart hammering against his ribs. He felt Marcus' stare burning into him, a reminder of the oath he had sworn when he joined the order. The prisoner's frail voice broke through the night, carrying words that struck Jonathan like arrows. Prisoner said, "Please, I have no secrets worth dying for." Jonathan's chest heaved as memories of his family's voices echoed in his mind. Marcus exhaled sharply, stepping closer, his boots splashing in the puddles. Marcus said, "Every hesitation makes you weak." Jonathan swallowed hard, dagger shaking at his side, eyes refusing to meet the prisoner's. Lightning lit the sky once more, framing the scene in a pale blue glow. Jonathan whispered under his breath, unheard by Marcus, "Weakness or not, I am still a man, not just a weapon." The storm thundered, as though history itself roared its judgment. Jonathan's pulse surged as Marcus's hand landed heavily on his shoulder, grip firm, voice filled with menace. Marcus said, "The code binds you. Break it, and you betray us all." Jonathan's chest tightened, breath shallow, as he recalled the night his village was destroyed. That memory had driven him to the order, but the humanity within him resisted the weight of the dagger. The prisoner's eyes shone with unspoken hope, as though sensing Jonathan's battle within. Jonathan clenched his jaw, shaking off Marcus's grip. Jonathan said, "Obedience without honor is not strength." Marcus's eyes darkened, his lips curling. Marcus said, "History remembers victors, not martyrs." The prisoner shivered violently, cold rain soaking his fragile body. Jonathan's soul screamed with conflict, his blade reflecting both the storm and the shadow of choice. Courtyard grew heavier with silence between thunderclaps. Jonathan felt the dagger burn in his grip, as though it demanded blood. Marcus stood unyielding, his armor gleaming in the storm light. Marcus said, "Kill him or I will." Jonathan's breath caught as he looked down at the prisoner's trembling form. The boy's lips moved, whispering something barely audible over the storm. Jonathan crouched, straining to hear. Prisoner said, "I am not your enemy." Jonathan's chest tightened, eyes closing for a heartbeat as guilt pressed in. He remembered his father's words from years past. A man without honor is already dead. Rising again, Jonathan's gaze locked with Marcus, his silence louder than defiance. The storm's climax raged as Jonathan's indecision became unbearable. His grip on the dagger faltered, and the weight of history pressed down. Marcus's voice thundered louder than the storm. Marcus said, "If you cannot act, then you are nothing." Jonathan's gaze swept over the prisoner, frail yet defiant in his own survival. The boys whispered, courage carved into Jonathan's heart, reminding him that he once believed in something greater. Jonathan said, "If nothing is all that remains, then let it be with honor intact." Marcus's expression twisted, a dangerous spark in his eyes as he stepped forward. The storm lit the courtyard in violent flashes of blue, casting the three figures in stark relief. The assassin torn, the officer merciless, the prisoner desperate. The code demanded obedience, but Jonathan's soul demanded resistance. Jonathan walked through the fortress corridors, every step echoing with the storm still raging outside. His dagger hung heavy at his side, yet his conscience weighed far more. He replayed Marcus's words, sharp and merciless, but they only fueled the conflict within him. Jonathan said, "If obedience is strength, why does it hollow me inside?" The stone walls seemed to whisper back, reminding him of the countless executions carried out under the code. His hand brushed against the scar on his arm, a mark of survival, not honor. At the end of the corridor, a dim lantern revealed Eleanor Ward, a fellow assassin with knowing eyes. Eleanor said, "Your hesitation is dangerous, Jonathan. Doubt invites death." His throat tightened as he faced her, realizing that his weakness was no longer a secret. Jonathan stopped short, his breath visible in the cold air. Eleanor's gaze pierced him, a silent accusation. Eleanor said, "Marcus will not tolerate another failure." Jonathan exhaled slowly, gripping his dagger's hilt, though he had no intention of raising it. His mind replayed the prisoner's words, "I am not your enemy." They echoed like church bells, refusing to fade. Jonathan said, "Perhaps the code has become the enemy." Eleanor's jaw tightened, her eyes narrowing. Eleanor said, "Speak those words too loudly, and you'll be hunted by your own." The silence stretched, filled only by the dripping of water from the ceiling. Jonathan lowered his eyes, knowing that survival demanded obedience, but his spirit resisted every demand. Later that night, Jonathan sat in the barracks, staring at the dagger laid across the wooden table. His fellow recruits slept restlessly, the storm muffled beyond thick walls. He traced the weapon's edge with his finger, whispering words no one could hear. Jonathan said, "This blade was meant for duty, but what if it only kills honor?" Memories of his family's faces rose unbidden. His mother's smile, his brother's laughter. They were the reasons he had joined, yet also the reasons he now doubted. A candle flickered nearby, casting long shadows on his weary face. Jonathan clenched his fist until his knuckles whitened, knowing he stood at a crossroads that could destroy him. The barracks door creaked open, revealing Marcus's imposing figure. His armor clinked with each deliberate step. "My." Jonathan straightened, dagger still on the table. Marcus said, "I hear whispers of hesitation. Do not forget, the order is your life now." Jonathan's pulse raced as he rose, meeting Marcus's cold stare. Jonathan said, "Life without honor is no life at all." Marcus's eyes narrowed dangerously, his tone slicing the silence. Marcus said, "Honor is a luxury for the powerless. You serve strength, not sentiment." Jonathan's chest burned with unspoken fury, but he swallowed it, knowing Marcus held authority over his fate. The storm outside roared, as if echoing his turmoil. After Marcus left, Eleanor entered quietly, her expression softer this time. She moved closer, lowering her voice. Eleanor said, "You cannot fight the code alone, Jonathan, but perhaps you don't have to." His brows furrowed, surprise flickering in his weary eyes. Jonathan whispered, "You doubt as well." She looked away briefly, then back with steel in her gaze. Eleanor said, "Doubt is not weakness, it is the spark that keeps us human." Jonathan felt the faintest relief wash over him, though fear still coiled in his chest. The storm began to calm outside, replaced by dripping rain. Jonathan knew this fragile moment was the first thread of rebellion. The fortress courtyard was alive again by morning, soldiers sharpening blades and servants rushing with supplies. Jonathan stood at the edge, hood drawn low, his eyes tracing the movements of the order like a predator circling prey. He heard whispers about a traitor leaking information to the enemy, whispers Marcus fed with venom. Jonathan said, "Suspicion keeps us divided, not strong." Eleanor appeared beside him, her voice low. Eleanor said, "Whispers serve Marcus. He thrives in chaos." Jonathan's jaw clenched as he watched Marcus address the men with fiery words, declaring loyalty above all else. Marcus said, "Betrayal is punished by death. Mercy is weakness." Jonathan's hand curled into a fist. The prisoner's words haunted him still, a reminder that truth was fragile within walls built on fear. Jonathan's gaze lingered on Marcus as he roused the soldiers, their cheers echoing like thunder. Yet in the crowd, Jonathan spotted Samuel Reed, his longtime comrade. Samuel's face bore unease, his eyes flicking nervously toward Marcus. Jonathan approached him later, in the armory's quiet. Samuel said, "The order grows darker with each command. Still, I cannot walk away." Jonathan's voice cracked with tension. Jonathan said, "Then where do we stand when duty destroys honor?" Samuel shifted uncomfortably, avoiding his eyes. Samuel said, "We stand alive, or we do not stand at all." Jonathan's chest tightened, the gulf between them widening. The storm outside had passed, but inside the fortress, tension only swelled. That night, Jonathan followed hushed voices through the corridors, his instincts sharp as the edge of his blade. He saw Marcus conferring with a cloaked figure, their exchange hurried and tense. Jonathan stayed in the shadows, straining to hear. Marcus said, "Our enemies will fall once the code is enforced without hesitation." The cloaked figure handed him a scroll, vanishing into the darkness. Jonathan's pulse hammered. He stepped back, careful not to be heard, but every creak of the stone seemed to betray him. The fortress that once sheltered him now felt like a cage filled with secrets. Jonathan whispered to himself, "The code is no shield. It is a chain." Jonathan returned to Eleanor with urgency, his breath sharp from running the corridors. He described what he had seen, his voice hushed but burning with conviction. Jonathan said, "Marcus speaks of enforcing the code with blood. He plots beyond loyalty." Eleanor's brow furrowed, her voice firm. Eleanor said, "Then he is the greater danger, not the prisoner." Jonathan nodded, fear and resolve clashing within him. The candlelight flickered between them, shadows stretching like fingers across the walls. Jonathan said, "If Marcus rises unchecked, we all become executioners without conscience." Eleanor's eyes hardened with agreement, yet her whisper carried dread. Eleanor said, "Then we walk a blade's edge, Jonathan. One wrong step and it will cut us both." The night ended with Jonathan alone in the courtyard, staring at the prisoner's cell from afar. The boy sat hunched in the shadows, barely moving, yet his survival carried a stubborn defiance. Jonathan felt a strange kinship with him, both trapped, both fighting unseen battles. His mind churned with Marcus' threats and Eleanor's warning. He said quietly to himself, "If the code demands his blood, then the code is already broken." The torches flickered, their glow trembling against the dark stones. Above, the moon broke through thinning clouds, its light falling like judgment. Jonathan's decision was not yet made, but the path of conflict was already carved in stone. At dawn, the fortress bell tolled, summoning the assassins into the great hall. The air was thick with anticipation, the walls echoing with the clank of armor and boots. Jonathan stood among them, hood drawn low, but his heart raced louder than the drums of war. Marcus strode to the front, his crimson cloak trailing like blood across the floor. Marcus said, "Today we root out betrayal. Mercy has no place in this order." The words rippled like poison through the hall. Jonathan glanced toward Samuel, who shifted uneasily, eyes cast downward. Eleanor's gaze found Jonathan's, a silent warning in her expression. Jonathan whispered under his breath, "If this is loyalty, it reeks of fear." The room grew colder, as though the stone itself recoiled from Marcus' decree. Marcus paced before the gathered assassins, his voice rising with each word. Marcus said, "A traitor festers within these walls, feeding our enemies. Until he is revealed, we live in shadow." His glare swept over them like a blade. Jonathan's chest tightened as the prisoner was dragged in, shackles clanging, face bruised, but eyes defiant. Marcus pointed at him with venom. Marcus said, "This boy carries secrets that endanger us all. His silence will be broken." Jonathan felt the world tilt. He whispered, "Or perhaps it is the lies that bind us." Eleanor stiffened beside him, lips pressed tight, while Samuel shifted farther away, unwilling to be caught between loyalty and doubt. The prisoner collapsed to his knees, guards forcing him down before Marcus. His lips quivered, but no words left his mouth. Jonathan's fingers dug into his palms as he fought the urge to intervene. Marcus's tone thundered across the hall. Marcus said, "His silence is treason. The code demands blood." The hall roared with approval from some, but others shifted uneasily in the shadows. Jonathan felt the prisoner's eyes lock on him, pleading without words, reminding him of everything he still valued. Jonathan thought, "If I move now, I betray the order. If I stay silent, I betray myself." His body stiffened, as though caught between two blades aimed at his throat. After the assembly, Jonathan found Eleanor in the shadows of the courtyard, the storm clouds returning overhead. His voice cracked with urgency. Jonathan said, "If Marcus kills the boy, the code becomes tyranny." Eleanor's expression was sharp, though her eyes revealed fear. Eleanor said, "And if we resist, we are marked as traitors too." Jonathan stepped closer, rain beginning to patter on stone. Jonathan said, "Then let them call us traitors. I will not kill for lies." Eleanor's jaw tightened, but her silence revealed reluctant agreement. Thunder rumbled, as though the sky itself warned them of the danger they now embraced. Night fell heavy, cloaking the fortress in silence. Jonathan moved through the corridors, every shadow a threat. He reached the barred cell where the prisoner sat shivering in chains. Jonathan whispered, "I cannot promise to save you, but I will not be your executioner." The boy raised his head slowly, his eyes hollow yet glinting with fragile hope. Prisoner said, "Then you are the only one who sees me as more than a tool." Jonathan's chest tightened, knowing the boy's fate was bound to his own. Beyond the bars, the fortress seemed to breathe with suspicion, walls listening for treason. Jonathan clenched the dagger at his side, his vow sealing his path. The fortress roared with tension as Marcus summoned his council to the war chamber. "May ye?" Jonathan stood against the wall, silent but alert. Maps stretched across the oak table, candles dripping wax like blood. Marcus slammed his fist down. Marcus said, "The traitor's silence proves his guilt. Tomorrow he dies." Jonathan's pulse pounded, each word striking like a hammer. Eleanor met his eyes across the room, fear and defiance mixing in her gaze. Jonathan said quietly to himself, "If tomorrow ends his life, tonight must change everything." He slipped from the chamber, heart racing, the weight of choice pressing heavier than steel armor. Jonathan crept through the fortress corridors that night, his steps silent as he approached the prisoner's cell once more. Inside, the boy's voice shook but carried strange resolve. Prisoner said, "I was never meant to be your enemy. My name is Adrian, son of the fallen king." Jonathan froze, the revelation slamming into him like a blade. Adrian said, "If I die here, the last claim to the throne dies with me." Jonathan's breath caught, eyes narrowing. Jonathan whispered, "Marcus knows. That is why he wants you silenced." The boy nodded, frail but determined. Adrian said, "Then you must choose, code or crown, duty or honor." Jonathan staggered back from the bars, Adrian's words spiraling in his mind. A prince disguised as a prisoner. This changed everything. Eleanor appeared silently behind him, her voice low and urgent. Eleanor said, "You've discovered it too." Jonathan turned, startled, his dagger half raised. Jonathan said, "You knew?" Her eyes darkened with pain. Eleanor said, "I suspected. Marcus hunts heirs, not traitors. The code has become his weapon." Jonathan's chest burned, fury and betrayal clashing. The storm outside cracked through the night again, thunder rolling like the sound of war drums. Eleanor stepped closer, her voice barely a whisper. Eleanor said, "If Marcus kills Adrian, the last rightful heir vanishes, and his grip on power becomes absolute." Jonathan's eyes narrowed, torn between survival and rebellion. Jonathan said, "If I defy him, he will brand me traitor." Eleanor's lips pressed tight before she answered. Eleanor said, "Then be a traitor to tyranny, not to honor." Jonathan looked back at Adrian, who met his gaze with fragile defiance. The cell bars seemed to mock him, barriers between his oath and his humanity. For the first time, Jonathan saw not a prisoner, but a future worth protecting. The night thickened with danger as Jonathan, Eleanor, and Adrian's fates entwined. Jonathan pressed his forehead to the cold iron bars, whispering his vow. Jonathan said, "I will not let Marcus bury the truth. If I must break the code, so be it." Adrian's tired eyes brightened, the spark of hope flickering alive. Eleanor placed a hand on Jonathan's shoulder, firm and resolute. Eleanor said, "Then we stand together against Marcus and his code." The storm outside seemed to quiet, as though the world itself held its breath. In that silence, Jonathan's decision transformed him, from reluctant assassin into a man bound not by duty, but by honor. The great hall was filled with firelight, and still as Marcus gathered the assassins for judgment. Adrian was dragged before the assembly, chains clattering against stone. Jonathan's pulse thundered, knowing this moment would decide everything. Marcus said, "Tonight, the code is tested. The traitor dies, and the order is purified." His voice carved through the hole like a blade. Jonathan's chest heaved as he stepped forward, eyes locked on Marcus. Jonathan said, "The only traitor here is the man who twists the code for power." Gasps rippled through the assassins. Eleanor appeared at Jonathan's side, her expression resolute. Marcus's gaze hardened into fury. Marcus said, "Then you both die with him." The storm outside rattled the fortress, echoing the war about to begin. The hall erupted in chaos. Blades scraped from sheaths, boots thundered on stone. Marcus drew his sword, the steel flashing in torchlight. Jonathan's dagger gleamed in his grip, every muscle coiled with defiance. Marcus roared, "You dare raise steel against your master?" Jonathan's voice cut back, sharp as the storm. Jonathan said, "I raise it against a tyrant." Eleanor stepped closer, her own blade drawn, eyes steady despite the danger. Adrian strained against his chains, shouting hoarsely, "End this! Do not let him claim my blood." Thunder cracked outside as torches sputtered in the gale, shadows leaping across stone walls. The first clash was imminent. Steel clashed as Jonathan and Marcus collided, sparks flying in the hall's torchlight. Marcus's strikes were brutal, driven by rage, while Jonathan's movements were sharp, fueled by desperation and honor. Marcus sneered between blows. Marcus said, "History will remember me, not your defiance." Jonathan parried, his voice hoarse. Jonathan said, "History remembers those who fought for truth, not fear." Eleanor intercepted a soldier rushing forward, her blade cutting swift arcs as she fought at Jonathan's side. Adrian crawled to the edge of the fight, straining against chains, his voice rising in desperate cries. The hall rang with steel and fury, as storm winds howled through shattered windows. Jonathan staggered as Marcus's blade cut across his shoulder, blood soaking his cloak. Pain seared through him, but his grip tightened, eyes burning with resolve. Marcus pressed harder, roaring, "Mercy is for the weak." Jonathan's voice was ragged, yet unyielding. Jonathan said, "Mercy is what separates men from monsters." Eleanor struck down another soldier, rushing to shield Jonathan's flank. Adrian shouted with raw desperation, "Stand! Do not let him win!" Jonathan forced Marcus back a step, lightning illuminating both men's faces, one twisted with rage, the other with defiance. The fortress itself seemed to shake as steel rang louder than the storm. The final clash came as thunder split the sky. Jonathan twisted beneath Marcus's strike, driving his dagger into the older man's side. Marcus staggered, crimson cloak darkened with blood. His glare burned with hatred, even as strength faltered. Marcus hissed, "You think honor will save you? History bows to victors." Jonathan's voice trembled but stood resolute. Jonathan said, "Then let history bow to truth." Marcus collapsed, his sword clattering across the stone. The hall fell into stunned silence. Eleanor lowered her blade, breath heaving, eyes fixed on Jonathan. Adrian's chains rattled as he struggled upright, whispering hoarsely, "You chose honor." The storm eased, rain hissing gently against stone, as if the world exhaled in relief. The hall was hushed, only the crackle of torches and the storm's fading sigh outside filling the silence. Marcus's body lay sprawled on the cold stone, crimson cloak pooling like spilled blood. Jonathan stood trembling, dagger heavy in his hand, his breath ragged. Eleanor moved closer, her hand steadying his arm. Eleanor said, "It is done." Jonathan's voice was low, almost broken. Jonathan said, "No, it has only begun." Adrian, still bound in chains, lifted his bruised face toward Jonathan with faint hope. Adrian whispered, "You gave me back more than life. You gave me a chance to reclaim what was lost." The storm clouds parted, and pale moonlight spilled into the hall, illuminating their battered faces. The remaining assassins shifted uneasily, their loyalty shaken. Some lowered weapons, others simply stared, uncertain. Jonathan raised his voice, still raw, but unyielding. Jonathan said, "The code was meant to guide us, not enslave us. Marcus poisoned it with fear." Murmurs spread across the hall, doubt carving fissures into their unity. Eleanor stepped forward, her tone sharp as steel. Eleanor said, "Follow him, and you choose tyranny. Follow honor, and you stand as more than shadows." Adrian's chains rattled as he tried to rise, his presence lending weight to her words. The assassins wavered, torn between the remnants of Marcus's rule and the fragile hope Jonathan offered. Later, in the dim corridor outside the cell, Jonathan unlocked Adrian's chains with shaking hands. The heavy iron fell away, clattering against the stone like thunder's echo. Adrian exhaled sharply, rubbing bruised wrists, his voice steady despite exhaustion. Adrian said, "I am heir to a crown built on blood, but without honor, I am nothing." Jonathan's gaze softened, his voice almost gentle. Jonathan said, "Then perhaps we both fight not for thrones, but for what makes us men." Eleanor watched them, silent yet resolute, her eyes reflecting the torchlight. For the first time, there was no storm, only the quiet breath of possibility. At dawn, the courtyard lay drenched in silver light, rain-soaked stones, glistening. Adrian stood free for the first time, his posture fragile but noble. Jonathan and Eleanor flanked him, their eyes sweeping over the fortress that had become both prison and battleground. Jonathan said quietly, "The code lies broken, but its shadow will follow us." Adrian placed a hand on Jonathan's shoulder, his words carrying gravity beyond his years. Adrian said, "Then, let us build something greater than shadows." Eleanor looked to the horizon where sunlight pierced the clouds, her voice calm but firm. Eleanor said, "The world will not forgive us easily, but it may yet remember us rightly." Jonathan stood alone after the others departed, his gaze fixed on the battlefield of the night before. Marcus's crimson cloak had been draped over a stone, stained with blood yet fluttering faintly in the breeze. Jonathan said softly, "History may not remember my mercy, but it will not forget my choice." He turned from the fortress, walking into the mist beyond the gates. The world outside waited, uncertain but alive with possibility. The sound of distant church bells carried through the morning air, solemn and haunting. Jonathan pulled his hood over his head, disappearing into the fog. The code was broken, but honor endured.